At my stepmother's 40th career anniversary party, in front of 300 guests, my father stood up and called me a lost child, the only failure of his life. My name is Jonas Miller. I'm 27 years old. Once I dreamed of becoming an architect, sketching skylines in the margins of my notebooks, convinced I would leave my mark in steel and glass. 2 years into college, the crushing weight of debt and the hollow echo of lectures that never touched my soul pushed me to drop out. Since then, I've been working quietly, not in boardrooms or ivory towers, but in small studios, drafting blueprints no one in my family bothered to ask about. To them, I became the silent son, the dropout, the black mark on the Miller name. That night, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and gold-trimmed tablecloths. Waiters floated past with trays of champagne, their polished shoes whispering against marble floors. Strings of violins filled the air, a song of celebration that should have felt like joy, but pressed against my chest like a stone. My stepmother, the celebrated attorney, basked under the lights. My older brother Daniel sat at her side, the pride of the family, his tailored suit gleaming, his laughter spilling like currency everyone wanted to collect. And me, I sat at the edge of the table invisible until my father's voice dragged me under the spotlight. "Jonas," he said, lifting his glass, "is the one mistake I never learned how to fix." The words cut sharper than any knife. Laughter rippled across the tables, polite at first, then careless like wildfire consuming dry leaves. Some guests covered their mouths, others shook their heads, as if my shame was entertainment served with dessert. My stepmother's smile faltered only for a second before she raised her glass again, pretending not to hear. My mother was not there. She had been gone for years, and without her I felt like a soldier, stripped of armor, left exposed. I sat, frozen, every nerve screaming to vanish, to sink into the floor. My chest burned with humiliation, but deeper than that was something darker fury. Not at the guests, not even at Daniel, but at my father. Richard Miller, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who once clapped when I built my first model house out of cardboard, now turned me into a punchline to amuse his colleagues. He had polished his pride in Daniel until it shone like gold, and he sharpened his contempt for me until it sliced through my skin. I wanted to scream, to shout back that I was not a mistake, not a failure. But the words lodged in my throat, heavy and immovable. My hands clenched under the table nails, pressing crescents into my palms. I swallowed my rage like poison. My mind whispered, "Walk away, Jonas. Don't give him what he wants." Yet another voice rose, quieter but stronger. "One day you will show him. One day his laughter will choke in his throat." That night I didn't just hear my father's verdict. I felt a line being drawn in the marble floor of that ballroom. On one side was the man he wanted me to be, Daniel's shadow, obedient, polished, safe. On the other side was me, the son he dismissed, yet the only one holding a truth powerful enough to turn his smirk into silence. And though I stayed quiet, as the laughter roared, something inside me shifted. The silence I carried for years cracked open, waiting for the night I would break it. I don't even remember how my legs carried me out of that ballroom. One moment I was pinned to my chair by shame, the next, I was pushing past linen-draped tables and glittering champagne glasses, my father's laughter still ringing in my ears. I kept my eyes low, avoiding the pitying gaze of my half-sister Sophia. She reached out as I passed, whispering my name, but I pulled away before her hand could touch me. I couldn't bear her sympathy, not when it felt like salt poured into an open wound. The hotel's marble hallway stretched before me like an endless tunnel. My reflection flashed across the polished floor, a distorted version of myself, shoulders hunched tight, crooked eyes hollow. I shoved through the glass doors and the night air slapped my face cold and sharp. Outside the parking lot yawned a sea of shadow broken only by yellow lamps flickering overhead. I walked fast, almost running until I reached my car. Then I stopped pressing my palms against the cool metal, my chest heaving. From inside the hotel, laughter spilled out each time the doors swung open. It chased me across the asphalt, mocking, reminding me of the spectacle I had become. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a ragged breath. My father had done it again, taken the happiest moment of someone else's life and turned it into a stage for my humiliation. And I had let him. "Jonas," a voice called from behind. I turned. Evelyn. She had a camera slung around her neck, her heels clicking against the pavement as she hurried toward me. Evelyn Price, my childhood friend, the girl who once helped me build cardboard castles in her backyard. Now she was a photographer covering the event, capturing polished smiles and champagne toasts. She stopped a few feet away, breathless, her eyes searching mine. "Don't listen to him," she said softly. "You don't deserve this." For a moment I wanted to collapse into her words, to let them hold me up where my own legs were failing, but pride cut through me sharper than pain. I shook my head. "Not tonight, Evelyn. Please." She hesitated, her hand half raised, then slowly lowered it. Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing more. She understood me too well when I built walls no one could climb them. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty lot. My hands gripped the wheel knuckles, pale. The thought hit me I could leave. Tonight. Pack what little I owned, drive, until the city lights disappeared in the rearview mirror, vanish into a place where my father's voice would never find me. The idea was tempting. Freedom lay in the ignition just one turn away. But as I sat there chest tight, a different fire burned in me. It whispered that leaving would be surrender, that running would brand me with the very label my father had carved into me. Failure. I closed my eyes. Inside the ballroom, music and laughter soared as if nothing had happened. But out here in the shadows, I made a vow I would not let his laughter define me. If I left, it would not be in defeat. It would be in preparation. And one day, I would return not with shame, but with proof that his words had never been the truth. I sat in my car, the engine silent, the night pressing against the windows like a weight. My father's words echoed in my chest, heavy and unrelenting. And as I stared at the steering wheel, another sound rose from the depths of memory. A different voice, softer, steadier, the only one that had ever broken through the noise of Richard Miller's contempt. My grandfather's voice. "Jonas, you are not a failure. You're just walking a path they don't understand yet." That sentence had been my lifeline since I was a boy, but tonight it returned like a whisper against the roar of humiliation. I remembered being 12 years old, standing in the driveway while Daniel, 3 years older, showed off his latest trophy from a debate competition. My father beamed at him, clapped him on the back, introduced him to neighbors as the son destined for greatness. And me, I stood off to the side, clutching a crumpled drawing of a bridge I'd sketched in math class. My father didn't even glance at it. He waved me inside like I was a shadow, cluttering the picture. Daniel didn't mean to hurt me. He rarely did. He was polished golden, the kind of child parents brag about at every dinner party. Straight A's varsity team captain, a scholarship waiting before he even applied. But his shine cast a long shadow, and I lived in it. My father made sure of that. Every meal, every holiday, every family photo was another reminder of who succeeded and who fell short. My mother might have shielded me, but she had been gone since I was 8, taken by an illness I barely understood at the time. Her absence left a hollow space in the house that no one tried to fill. My stepmother filled it with sharp smiles and stricter rules. My father filled it with comparisons, as if measuring me against Daniel could somehow resurrect the wife he lost. And yet there was Grandpa Henry, my mother's father. A retired engineer with hands as weathered as oak bark and eyes that never looked at me with disappointment. He was the only one who asked to see my sketches, who sat with me at his kitchen table, under the hum of an old lamp, nodding as I laid out crude drawings of towers and bridges. He'd stroke his gray mustache and murmur, "Jonas, this is good. Don't let anyone tell you different." Those evenings smelled of pipe tobacco and peppermint candy, his cane tapping against the linoleum as he stood to fetch more paper for me. He didn't promise me I'd be great, didn't pressure me to be like Daniel. He only said, "Keep building, keep imagining. That's who you are." It was Henry's voice, not Richard's, that lived in me tonight. And as I gripped the wheel in that parking lot, torn between leaving forever and facing the fire again, I realized something. My father's words had always been a prison, but my grandfather's had been the key. Maybe I had been silent too long. Maybe the time had come to prove that Henry was right, that I wasn't lost, just unseen. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, the city lights blurring past my windshield, but I wasn't really seeing them. My father's voice still clung to me like smoke, choking every breath. Yet beneath the weight of humiliation, something else pulsed my grandfather's words, steady as a heartbeat. "They don't understand your path. Not yet." By the time I pulled into the cracked driveway of my apartment building, my decision was already forming. I couldn't erase what had happened tonight, but maybe I could redefine it. Not with arguments, not with shouted words, but with something undeniable. My apartment was small, 2 rooms stacked with unwashed mugs, rolled up blueprints, and a laptop glowing faintly on the desk. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I locked the door behind me and crossed to the steel cabinet shoved into the corner. My hands trembled as I pulled out the key I always carried on my chain, sliding it into the lock. The metal groaned as the door swung open. Inside sat the pieces of a life no one believed I had built. The first file I lifted was a signed contract, crisp and official, bearing the letterhead of a Japanese construction firm. Their executives had flown in months earlier, curious about my concept for sustainable housing that could cut energy costs by nearly half. They'd laughed when I presented the prototype model, but by the end of the meeting, they were offering me partnership terms. My father never knew. He never asked. Beneath it lay the blueprint, the design I'd spent countless nights perfecting. A home that breathed with its occupants, shifting light and airflow, conserving resources without stripping away comfort. The patent seal from the U.S. office, stamped across the cover, proved it wasn't just fantasy. It was mine, protected and recognized. And then the letter. Heavy stock paper embossed with the name of a Chicago investment fund. An invitation, not a question. They were prepared to inject $500,000 into my project. They called it revolutionary. They called it the future. I stared at the stack on my kitchen table, my heart pounding harder with each page. This wasn't just paperwork. It was armor. It was proof that walking away from college hadn't been failure. It had been freedom. Proof that the hours I'd spent alone, the sacrifices, the hunger, The doubt had carved something real. I sank into the chair, running my fingers over the embossed letters. All those nights when I wondered if I was wasting my life, when I imagined my father's sneer echoing in my head, these papers had been the only answer. Now they were more than that, they were a weapon. For years I had stayed silent, convincing myself my work would speak when the time was right. Maybe that time had come. Tonight my father had turned me into a spectacle of shame. Tomorrow I could turn that shame into silence. His silence. I closed the cabinet and locked it again, but this time the fear didn't follow me. I knew what I had to do. The laughter at the ballroom wasn't the end of my story. It was the prologue to something greater. And when I walked back through those doors, I wouldn't be empty-handed. I had just gathered the files back into my briefcase when my phone buzzed across the table. The vibration startled me sharp in the stillness of my apartment. I hesitated, staring at the screen. Evelyn! For a second, I almost let it ring out. I wasn't ready to speak to anyone, not with my chest still burning from humiliation, not with the papers spread like weapons across my table. But something in me said, "Pick up," so I did. Her voice came fast, urgent, laced with the background noise of clinking glasses and distant music. "Jonas, you need to listen. He's doing it again." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Your father," she said, breathless. "He's talking to a group of investors right now. Reporters are there too. He's using your name, telling them you're proof of what happens when someone wastes opportunity, that no company should ever trust you with a dime." I gripped the phone tighter, knuckles pale. My father wasn't finished with me. He wasn't satisfied humiliating me once. He wanted to bury me completely, to salt the earth so nothing with my name could grow. Evelyn's voice dropped lower. "Jonas, if you don't say something, this will stick. They'll write it down. Tomorrow your name could be printed in headlines as a joke. He'll define you forever." The words struck like a hammer. I glanced at the briefcase on the table, its black leather gleaming under the dim kitchen light. Inside were contracts, blueprints, proof of years I had clawed my way through doubt and debt. Proof my father had never cared to see. I closed my eyes, Evelyn's voice echoing in my ear. "You don't deserve this, Jonas. But if you stay quiet, you'll let him win." Silence. That had been my armor for years. I had convinced myself that if I worked hard enough, long enough, the results would speak louder than my father ever could. But tonight showed me the truth. Silence only gave him the stage. He filled it with his narrative, and the world listened because I said nothing. "Not anymore. I'm coming back," I said, my voice steady, almost foreign to my own ears. There was a pause on the line, and then Evelyn whispered, "Good. Then I'll be here when you walk in." I hung up, staring at my reflection in the window. My face looked pale, drawn, but my eyes, they carried something I hadn't seen before. Resolve. Not the quiet, fragile kind, but a fire that could no longer be smothered. I snapped the briefcase shut, the metallic click echoing through the small apartment. That sound wasn't just a lock, it was a decision. My father thought he had written the ending of my story tonight. But I was about to tear the page in half. When I stepped back into that ballroom, I wouldn't be the son who left in shame. I would be the man who returned with proof, and this time, the silence would belong to him. The drive back to the hotel felt shorter than it had earlier, as if the city itself was carrying me toward something inevitable. My briefcase sat on the passenger seat, its weight heavier than steel, yet steadier than any shield I'd ever known. Every stoplight, every hum of the engine pulsed with the same thought. This ends tonight. When I pulled into the parking lot, the music still leaked from the ballroom, muffled but alive. The same laughter that had chased me out hours before now drifted through the air again. But it no longer pressed against me. It fueled me. I stepped out, shoes crunching against gravel, and gripped the briefcase like a weapon. The hotel lobby was warm, gold-lit, filled with the faint perfume of roses from arrangements set along the walls. Guests lingered near the doors, chatting, glasses of champagne in hand. Conversations faltered as I passed. Eyes followed me, whispers stirred. They hadn't expected me to come back, and certainly not with the black case swinging at my side. I reached the ballroom doors, placed my hand against the polished wood, and pushed them open. The sound of music and chatter flooded over me, brighter, sharper, almost blinding. And then it happened. The spotlight above the stage tilted, catching me square in the chest as I stepped inside. The crowd hushed, not instantly, but like a tide pulling back. Heads turned. Forks paused mid-air. The laughter thinned until silence pressed down like a weight. I kept walking. Every step echoed against the marble steady, deliberate. My eyes fixed on the head table where my father sat, a glass of wine in his hand, mid-sentence, with a group of men in tailored suits. His smile froze when he saw me. I didn't stop until I reached him. With a single motion, I set the briefcase down on the white linen, its thud cutting through the quiet like a drumbeat. The sound traveled across the room. People leaned forward. My mother's father, Grandpa Henry, straightened in his chair near the front, eyes gleaming. Sophia covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Dad, I said, my voice louder than I thought it could be. You've told everyone here who you think I am. A failure, a mistake, but you never asked who I've become. I clicked open the latches. The metallic snap echoed sharp, final. I lifted the lid and turned the contents toward him, the contracts, the patent, the letter from the investors. His smirk faltered, the color draining from his face, as if the spotlight itself had burned it away. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Is that real?" Another leaned over the table to get a closer look. Evelyn stood at the edge of the crowd, camera raised her flash, exploding at the perfect moment, capturing my father's stunned expression, his lips parted, his mask of control cracking wide open. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking under his gaze. He was. And in that silence, broken only by the faint click of Evelyn's camera, I knew the tide had turned. For a long moment, no one moved. The papers lay on the table like a mirror, reflecting back the truth my father had worked so hard to bury. His jaw tightened, his eyes darting between the documents and my face, as if searching for some flaw, some trick that would let him dismiss it all. But there was none. The silence grew heavier, stretching across the ballroom until even the band lowered their instruments. Then, out of the stillness, a chair scraped against the floor. Sophia rose. My half-sister, dressed in a pale blue gown that shimmered under the lights, stepped forward with hesitant but determined strides. Her eyes glistened, and before I could speak, she reached for my hand. Her grip was warm, trembling. "I need to say this," she said, her voice breaking the silence like a bell. She turned, facing the crowd, then back to me. "Jonas, I've always admired you, not for grades or titles, but because you never pretended to be someone you weren't. You followed your own path, even when it cost you everything in this family." Gasps whispered through the audience. My chest tightened. For years, I thought Sophia barely noticed me, but here she was, standing against the tide, her words wrapping around me like armor. Before my father could respond, another voice joined in. Deep, steady. Daniel. My older brother stood slowly smoothing his suit jacket, his usual confidence tinged with something raw. He looked at me for a long moment before turning to the guests. "My brother's right," he said, his tone deliberate. Jonas has more courage than I've ever had. I chose the safe road, the one Dad mapped out for me. I played by every rule. But Jonas, he had the guts to walk away and build something real. That takes more strength than any trophy I ever won. The words hit harder than applause. For the first time, Daniel's spotlight wasn't blinding, it was shared. Then it happened. One clap, another. And then the sound swelled, rolling across the room like thunder. Guests rose to their feet, some with smiles, others with guilt etched into their faces. Hands reached out as I moved past the tables, firm shakes, nods of respect, words of apology whispered in hurried voices. Evelyn's camera flashed again, not to capture humiliation this time, but vindication. I caught her eyes in the crowd. She nodded, her lips curving into the smallest, proudest smile. And my father, Richard Miller, sat rigid pale. His fingers clenched around the stem of his glass until it threatened to snap. His lips parted once, as if to speak, but no words came. For the first time in my life, the man who always had the last word had nothing left to say. I looked at him not with hatred, but with clarity. The silence around him was louder than his insults had ever been. And for once, that silence belonged to me. The applause still rang in my ears, but I wasn't standing there for revenge. I realized it as I looked at my father's face, drained of color, locked in silence. This wasn't about crushing him or making him feel the sting I'd carried for years. It was about release, cutting myself free from the chain of his shadow. I glanced across the ballroom and found him Grandpa Henry. He had risen from his chair, leaning on his cane, his thin frame steady beneath the weight of 85 years. His eyes met mine, and he gave a slow nod, the kind that spoke louder than any speech. No theatrics, no grand gestures, just pride, quiet, unwavering, honest. The same pride he'd given me at his kitchen table when no one else cared to look at my drawings. That moment wrapped around me like a second skin. My father's disapproval had once defined me, carved me into a figure of shame. But Henry's belief had always been there too, a small flame waiting to grow. Tonight, it roared into fire. I turned back to the crowd, their faces softened, now no longer mocking. Some wore regret, others awe. But none of it mattered as much as the truth, beating inside my chest. My worth was never theirs to give. For years I thought success meant winning my father's approval. Every decision, every restless night I imagined holding it up like a trophy just to make him nod. But as I stood there, papers spread across the linen, my sister's hand gripping mine, my brother's words echoing support, I saw it clearly. I didn't need his nod. I never had. I closed the briefcase, slowly locking it with care. The applause swelled again, but I let it fade into the background like ocean waves receding. I wasn't clinging to it the way I once clung to scraps of validation. This victory wasn't about the room. It was about me. Richard Miller could spend the rest of his days calling me a failure. He could whisper it at board meetings, shout it at dinner tables, mutter it into his glass of bourbon at midnight. But it wouldn't matter. Because tonight proved what I had always feared wasn't true. His voice was not the final word on my life. As I stepped back from the table, Sophia squeezed my hand tighter. Daniel stood beside me like a shield, and Evelyn lifted her camera once more. I didn't pose for her. I didn't need to. The moment itself had already been captured, the son who walked out humiliated and returned whole. I left the ballroom that night, not as the lost child my father named me, but as the man I had built myself to be. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this: never let anyone, not even the people who raised you, define you as a failure. Your worth comes from what you build when no one is watching, and the courage to stand tall when everyone is. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where someone tried to define your worth? I'd love to hear your thoughts, share your feelings in the comments below, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Your stories matter here, and if you want more powerful true-to-life stories, don't forget to subscribe to Domestic Tragedy for the next chapter.